don't know if you can see the little 5 surfers down there, or 6. The waves don't look too bad, actually. Here comes a good swell. Go, 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 go. Oh, a little late. No, he got up. He's got it. Not a bad wave. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today I'm at Rodeo Beach, which is behind me. It's very windy, but I do have my wind buffer on the camera. Hopefully it's not too bad. I'm watching these surfers. The waves are pretty decent size rolling in for these guys. Anyway, I am going up there. It's about a half a mile walk, and I'm going to a battery Townsley, and they had 2 huge 16-inch mortar guns to protect the coast of San Francisco. They started building in 1928. They did 100 tests, never actually fired it, and it was active during World War II. At one point there was 100 servicemen up there controlling it and working on it around the clock, so it could be ready within 5 minutes to fire. So they tested these guys. They tested them at night, they tested them when it was raining, they tested them without electricity, all so they could fire the gun within 5 minutes. And a 16 round is huge. I don't know if it's like massive. So today they're gonna have rangers up there talking about it, so I thought today would be the day to go and check it out. It's another part of the Bay Area I've never really explored. Down here are the old Army barracks, and my brother at one point worked for the Marin Conservation Corps, and that was something you could do when you're like a little kid, basically. You hardly make any money, but those are the guys that made all the trails. Anyway, one time he said there was a metal door facing down on the ground, and he opened it up, and he was on top of a giant place where they'd have airplanes underground. And there's tunnels all over this place, because this is designed to be functioned. If they were getting bombed or raided, you could go from place to place into all these tunnels. So there's doorways and hidden tunnels all throughout this Marin Headlands area. Little beach here, private little cul-de-sac. This is on the way up. I'm not sure where I got my fascination with old military stuff, but to me it's interesting. It probably came from my brother. He used to watch all these World War II shows and movies. Tora Tora Tora, Midway, Bridge over the River Kwai, all those classic war movies. So I have a little bit of a passion for this stuff, and I do believe it'll, as every generation goes on, there'll be less and less people interested in it. So hopefully these videos I make will keep the memories alive of what this world was like 80 years ago. If you can see it on the video, but on the point, there's some islands back there, or out there. The range of this cannon is 25 miles, and it could literally reach those islands. And the mortar or the projectile weighed 2,100 pounds, so as much as a small compact car. Pretty insane. This hill's killing me. I am not in the most in shape person, and it's been uphill the whole way. Anyway, I knew what I was in for. Here's where the cannon or gun, I believe this is the big one, and we're going to go around to the other side. For those of you wanting more military, those white buildings straight across the swamp there is the Nike Missile Air Defense SF-88 launch area, and I have a full video of that. As a matter of fact, I have two, but check it out if you're interested. Well, here we are. I'm almost there. Down there in that parking lot is my car, and honestly it wasn't too bad of a walk. And here's the gun. And imagine 16-inch round coming out of this. And this actually was yeah, the USS Missouri. This is where this gun came from, number 386. And it's identical to the gun that was up here. So this is actually from a battleship. And it's massive, as you can see. When you see the size of it, then you kind of realize, oh yeah, I could see that going 25 miles. And they have, you see how these grooves are at an angle? The projectile will spin and not wobble in the air as it's going. All right, looks like the docents are here. We should be able to get a good little tour of this facility. They got the flag up indicating they're here today. Here's some old pictures here of it in its heyday.
We're about to walk through a generator room, and this held huge oil tanks. In fact, if you look at the floor, you can see the circular imprint. Big black tanks of diesel oil. And this allowed air to circulate around the oil tanks. And it also kept busy hands, away from you where they didn't want the soldiers messing around. This is a photograph of what the guys, this is just one of many pages from a yearbook they put out of the guys who was assigned just for this battery. This is, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It's like 50 guys. So there were like 5 pages like this of men that were here. We chose this one because if you look at the background of these guys, virtually all of these men, with a couple of exceptions, they're all 19, 20, 21 draftees, and only one of them went to college. This guy here. Most of them didn't even finish high school. It was the Depression. These were guys, most of them came from relatively poor backgrounds, a lot of them agricultural, and they've been drafted into the Army, and they end up here in a bunker overlooking the Golden Gate.
It's like a generator room or something. Power room. This is the power room.
We bring people here because we've been in the process of doing restoration and rehabilitation for about 15 years now. When we first opened the structure, this is what it looked like, except it was full of garbage and graffiti and broken beer bottles. And we have spent the last 15 years making it look this way. This is how it looked during wartime. The colors, the lighting,
the tracks for the
stenciling. Why can we do this?
The mortars or projectiles.
A year ago, this structure at the end of World War II It was,
Yeah.
And 3 years later, the Army decided it was no longer needed. It was scrapped.
Oh, I see.
And then they gave it out under lease to a science company, and they were using it to test small amounts of explosives underground. And that's why the steel wall was put here. This was the test area on this side. This area they didn't need. Behind these, all the electrical cables and telephone cables ran. I'll show you up ahead. We have a cutout.
So this is pretty crazy. We're way underground now. This must have been where they had the power room. Not sure why it's all locked off. I guess if the power goes out, you can't work. So I had to have everything monitored. Oh my God, this looks like where the guy slept. That looks comfy.
Yeah, and so instead of having all the cables underground, it was just easier to maintain them this way. And then the bunk beds were an afterthought. When they first built the place, there was no place for the soldiers to sleep. Almost as if they felt that their home in the barracks, that was all they needed. If a war ever broke out, they'd come up, fight whatever decisive battle it was, and then go home as victors or as prisoners. What happened though is when the war actually started, it was wait, and it was too far for them to live in the barracks because they had to be able to fire the guns in a 5-minute notice. So they got money, they installed all the bunks. So half of the soldiers lived in here while the other half were down in the barracks. And if you weren't assigned up here, that's when you could, get a bus into San Francisco, or they'd assign you guard duty or cutting grass or something. But while you were up here, always on alert. That's why the furthest you could go away from the battery was out on the road for a smoke. And when the bell rang that you were going to fire the guns, most of them, they grabbed their gear, they put it on, they headed for their duty stations. Somebody stayed behind, hooked all the bunks up. The guys in the generator room fired up all the generators. Everybody had a very specific job, and everybody was cross-trained, so that if somebody was wounded or killed, somebody else could jump in and take over their job immediately. There was a whole separate part of the gun battery which was underground down by the beach. In fact, did you park down and walk up the hill? Okay. When you first walk up, you go through a grove of trees and there's a couple of steel doors set into the hill. That's where the men who were doing all the mathematics for loading and aiming and firing the guns, they had an underground control room there. It wasn't attached to the structure because the concussion of firing the guns was so violent. They had their own separate room, plotting room. And people rotated between being up here on the gun and down at the plotting room. So again, cross-trained. So they had about 200 bullets or rounds of ammunition for each gun. Amazing, the big gun, if it fired over 250 times, it started to wear out. So they only kept enough on hand until the gun wore out. And that would be a long battle to fire 250 rounds from each gun. The yellow ones, these are like the ones I showed you outside. These were filled with explosive, and they're called armor piercing, because they were designed so that when you hit, boom, it went off inside. These big black ones here, it says target practice. When you're not, shooting for real, trying to sink a ship, if you're just shooting at a target, all you need to do is create a big splash in the water. And this is a whole lot cheaper. Each time they fired one of these, it was about $3,500 in 1940s dollars, which I think is like $70,000 today per shot.
Wow.
Yeah. These, whatever iron was going for. You were looking at the overhead, the trolley system. This is one of the things that where I said you had to try something to see if it worked in a prototype. This didn't work so good. The corners are so tight that the soldiers had a hard time maneuvering. So they used them, but it was something that next time around, because they built over 30 buildings of this design. They made the hallways bigger, and as the hallways were bigger, the curves were wider, and that solved the problem. Didn't help these guys, but they soldiered on. That's what they had. A normal bullet, like is fired from a rifle or from a pistol, the projectile and the gunpowder, they're together in a single case. These needed so much powder, it had to be stored and loaded separately. So here's the projectile. All this is gunpowder, almost 700 pounds per shot. And what the gunpowder does when it's ignited, you tend to think it's going to all go boom at the same time. It was a chemical reaction where the gunpowder, it burned from one end to the other. It was ignited down here, and then very rapidly, thousandths of a second, it burns all the way to here. As soon as it starts to burn, it builds up immense pressure inside the gun, and the projectile starts to move forward. In a few milliseconds, this thing is going from being stock still in the gun barrel to moving about 2,800 feet per second.
Wow.
It's just like that. And as the last of the gunpowder burns off, the bullet comes out the mouth of the gun, and it's followed by a huge ball of flame. The sound was enormous. It could break your eardrums. The concussion could knock you off your feet. So when these guys drilled endlessly without actually firing to remember to do everything safely by the book. And then when the day came and they actually did fire, safety, safety, safety. And they had to publish notices in the newspapers so that the people living nearby and in San Francisco, they'd know what to expect. The guns were going to fire. People would open their windows miles away. You take your china off the shelf. Over the hill, there were 2 dairy ranches. The cows wouldn't give milk for a couple of days. So, yeah, it was kind of a big deal.
How did the guys' eardrums survive? They had major protection, I imagine.
No.
No?
No. Early in the war, they didn't have anything except cotton.
Cotton.
And they didn't make you wear the cotton. The cotton was optional.
Yeah.
But you'll see a lot of photographs of guys with big tufts of it in their ears.
Yeah.
They just covered their ears and opened their mouth to equalize the pressure inside. Later on, I learned they did issue, I think it was like 1942, 43, they issued what we think of as earplugs.
They ever tested decibels in here when those things went off?
I never saw a test level.
Had to be very high.
One guy said it sounded like a thunderclap going off next to you.
Wow.
Yeah. Each one of these aluminum cans holds 3 bags of powder. And again, this is a prop because real ones weigh 110 pounds. Ain't that strong. And in this room, there was nothing but these cans. There was no machinery. In fact, you didn't want anything in here that could make a spark.
Is that why those are aluminum? So it's
That's
less
why they're
likely?
aluminum. They don't spark.
When you open them, they can't.
Yep. They have airtight lids, and they would, one of the processes was before the gun fired, they would open the lid, they would take the temperature of the gunpowder, because the temperature of the gunpowder would affect how much energy it created. The warmer it was, the more power. Also, too, they would they had test strips for humidity. Higher humidity and less. So it was all a balancing act, and all this stuff was plugged into the calculations. A whole lot of trigonometry involved here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and because of the fear of explosives, the soldiers, they were supposed to wear rubber boots, I guess something like Wellington boots, and every man I've talked to said they could never get them, wartime limitations, so they worked in their stocking feet, no shoes.
No, so for static electricity or?
No, old army boots, the soles were held on by nails.
Oh.
And you could actually strike a spark with a nail. I used to do that as a kid with your Sunday shoes.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
No, not and for God's sakes, no smoking anywhere. How many cans were in here? They left an inventory chalked on the wall. There were 150 cans like this.
They ever having any accidents or incidents?
Nothing that ever made it into a report.
Okay.
I can imagine there were probably a bunch of like smashed fingers and toes and stuff like that. But in terms of like big wounds,
comes with the job, I guess.
We're about to go out to the gun room. It's called the gun casemate. There's no gun in it. The gun is down parked by the side of the road. Someday it'll be in the gun room. But this is a drawing of how it looked with the men drawn in for scale. It's pretty formidable. This is the thickest concrete. Now it's not that much by today's standards. It's about 16 feet of concrete and then about 15 or 18 feet of dirt on top of that. But remember when they were designing this place, it was 90 years ago. And airplanes were, little biplanes like in King Kong. And maybe they could drop a bomb that weighed at most 500 pounds. And that's what they were thinking, the designers. In later years, during the war that followed, bombs that weighed 2,000 pounds and more were routinely being dropped. That's why this became obsolete in the space of just a few years. Advances during World War II. We're not even talking about the war of nuclear weapons. Really quick, this is a press photo taken on during one of the last firings. The kid who colorized this, we got it a little wrong. This is actually a ball of flame. So there was nothing growing on the hills outside here. Yes. It just burnt to a crisp, yeah. In fact, one guy remembers that his job was the day before firing, just hosing the hillside down with a fire hose to get everything as soaking wet as possible. Because they did have grass fires out here, and fire was always a problem too.
Yeah.
This is the big pit where the gun rotated. The gun sat at the level where we're standing. The pit was full of rollers and hydraulic machinery to aim the gun. This is what's called elevation and azimuth, left to right. We had a artist, different one, create a drawing. This is what the inside of the room looked like when the big gun was in place. Again, with a lonely soldier for size. We did one thing different, which was you couldn't see out, and there was a big shield. So the opening was closed by a big shield. This is a construction view. So they haven't put the side pieces on.
Yeah.
The fellows in here, they said they had no idea where the target really was, except by the telephone directions that they received down in the plotting room.
To left or right, something.
You got it. There's a couple of little eye slits. I don't know who got to look out there, but the only people that could really see the target were the fellows in the little tiny, we call them spotting stations, up and down the coast. Pill boxes sometimes, concrete and steel. And there would be two guys inside, one with a telescope, sweeping, waiting for the enemy to come. And the other guy was on a telephone. If they spotted an enemy ship, which never happened, but when they had target practice, the guy on the telescope, he would slowly track the ship. And every 30 seconds or so, the guy on the telephone would read the bearing, you know, azimuth 25052. Okay? And then they'd keep tracking, and then 30 seconds later, they'd give it again. Now, there were 9 pillboxes. So a guy up, say he's on the hill above us in the pillbox, the next pillbox down might be in San Francisco, and he's going to see the target from a very different angle. So you start with your basic geometry. If you know the distance side of one triangle side, and you know the angles, you can solve the triangle.
Yeah.
The trick is the boat keeps moving, the wind is blowing, the humidity, which you've measured, and the temperature, and then the air temperature, and the rotation of the earth, all of these things are factored in to the telephoned information the guys here to set the gun. And it took me a while to get this through my head, but you don't aim at the target. You aim where the target's gonna be when the bullet finally gets there. And they had to figure the bullet might be in the air for almost a minute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's why this is before computers. When computers first started to come online, one of the main applications was gunnery, both on naval ships and also for what's called the coast artillery.
Are these newts?
These are newts. These are red-eared newts. They live in here. We did some reading on this. When they built the place, they didn't realize how much water was going to be collected in.
There's a lot of them.
So they thought a little like a sump pump, like they have in your basement, would take care of it. And we don't have a sump pump, so we have a permanent lake. What happened to the guns is in 1948, they fired the guns for the last time when that picture was taken. And then the guns were cut up for scrap metal. They didn't even bother to pull them out. They just came up with big heavy cutting torches and they sliced them like giant steel zucchini, hauled them away for scrap metal. And so from 1948 onwards, the place was empty, except for temporary uses like the scientific testing company. And for a while it was a barracks again during the Korean War for soldiers who were assigned to anti-aircraft guns in case the Russians ever, sent bear bombers over. But it's been parkland ever since the 1980s. And our long-term goal is to get it back to the way it looked during World War II. We want to show people not just the technology, but we really want to show what was life like here and talk about what we call the war on the home front. You shouldn't throw a rock in there, because if everybody threw a rock in there, it'd fill up.
So after Pearl Harbor, everything went nuts here, right?
It went nuts?
Yeah, like red alert.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, thousands and thousands of soldiers were assigned to what's called the Harbor Defenses of San Francisco. It included not just the big guns, it included people on rooftops with binoculars, the air raid wardens, it included Navy patrol boats, it included blimps.
They thought this was the next target, right?
They thought this was the next target. It seemed logical, because after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we had nothing to stop an approaching Japanese fleet. I used to work at Pearl Harbor.
Oh, really? Wow.
What we know now from history is the Japanese expended every last bit of energy they had to take out the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor. They had no goal to ever go to the mainland of the U.S. That was beyond their span of control. Once the attack on Pearl Harbor was called off, the fleet headed right back to Japan. They didn't want to risk it that far from the Japanese home islands anymore. We didn't know that. We thought there's nothing to stop them. We can't find them.
Yeah.
And it only made sense. The next night, there was an air raid blackout in San Francisco. They thought that they had detected a flight of incoming Japanese planes. My mother remembers they're hiding under the dining room table. blackout curtains were put up because at this time, people had watched London be pounded by the Germans. It was called the Blitz.
Yep.
That they knew that there was no such thing as a safe civilian target, and that San Francisco might be next. It wasn't until about halfway through 1942 that the realization that the Japanese really weren't going to make an attack on those really became clear. But even then, the Coast Artillery stayed on guard.
Yeah.
So our long-range goal, as I mentioned, bring her back to the way it looked during World War II, get the gun remounted, do some more repair work, hopefully give it a good camouflage paint job. There were some extremely elaborate camouflage jobs employed during World War II. And bring people here so they can get a slice of war on the home front.
Is it true that all these places have tunnels attaching them all?
No.
No.
No. The only thing that attaches all these together are telephone lines.
Okay.
Each one of these is a self-contained little structure.
Because that was the rumor for a long time.
That's the rumor, though. There's one great rumor. There's a tunnel underneath the Golden Gate to connect to.
Well, like all the barracks had a tunnel, and you could go from here to the Nike facility. And
no, what people get this confused with is what the French built. It's called the Maginot Line, which was a huge, hundreds of miles of fortifications connected by underground railroads.
Oh wow!
And this pales in comparison to what they did in Europe.
Yeah.
So I'll turn you loose, and let me show you the way out.
Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So this is the Townsley Battery, as you heard. And the Farallon Islands are out there, and the projectile could reach there, which is insane. And imagine the sound that that gun would have made with no hearing protection. You just put your hands over your ears. I'm sure all the people that test fired this thing are all became deaf. Because my hearing's starting to go, and I just saw a lot of concerts growing up. I like how the newts are just chilling, just floating along. First I thought they were a snake because they keep their head above the water and wiggle. Got this chart on the wall here. A blackboard here once recorded the names and duties of the soldiers who operated the Coast Artillery gun mounted in this room. It took a crew of several dozen soldiers to load, aim, and fire this huge weapon. So this is a blackboard of everybody's duty and what they were supposed to be doing here.
They're taking the gun barrel off the trailer. How, I don't know, but they got it off, obviously. Push and shove and pull. And now, where we're standing is where this photograph was taken.
Oh.
So they got to figure out now, how are we going to get this 21-ton thing down this hill? And it was tough. It was really hard. Let's put some wood together. This to me looks like filming the pyramid, the building of the pyramids movie in 1948 or something. It's just, I'm making fun, but I'm not making fun because I don't even know how these fellas had the ability to get this thing off the trailer and then get it onto the wood that's going down the hill.
Wow. That's right here. That's crazy.
And all the wood. I mean, it makes me think of building the pyramids.
Yeah.
There's that same, we just saw this right there, Battery Townsley, 1938. So that's why the iron rails, or the iron hooks, not a hook, but the iron circles. Yes, they're all bent because of the weight of this thing. And if the war had come to us, which it never did, but if it had come to us and we had to fire the guns all these times, then we'd have to replace the barrels.
Wow.
Now we got to do the thing in reverse and get this barrel back up this hill and get a new one. I mean, it would have been.
Oh, so the whole thing would have to get replaced?
Yeah, and put it back together. Put the new barrel back together. I don't know if anybody ever had to do that, so that would have been another thing to figure out. How do we? How do we take the barrel off and then get a new one back? That's so crazy making.
Didn't have a spare.
And these were actually manufactured, I'm just reading my own notes, manufactured by the U.S. Navy at the, what's called the Watertown Arsenal back east. So they kind of had the exclusiveness on building these things. They were built all on the East Coast. So. And then here we are back before we took over.
Ah,
Excuse me, so there, how many guns we have?
There were two.
Two, so like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And one of the barrels, you saw the barrel?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
like
just-
the two, and then like each of that can shoot for like 200 something, right?
Yeah.
So like that's all we have.
That's it.
I see. Yeah. Of course, we never use it. Really.
We didn't have to use them,
Yeah,
thankfully.
luckily.
So when the GGNRA was put together in 70 something or other, 3 or 4 I think it was, then they had to figure out, oh, we got to clean this mess up because there's a lot of trees. It must have been a ton of work to get all this thing back, because this is taken right where we're standing, looking back down that tunnel.
all the trees are gone, huh? Yeah.
And but everything was just destroyed, and no longer can you get up there. You might say, well, why'd they build this road anyway? Well, they built the road so that if any enemies were flying over, they would see, oh, there's a road. Let's see where that goes. And they had a fake something up there at the end of this thing. They didn't want them to know that anything was here.
Decoy.
That's why. Well,
That's smart. Decoy road. Some very interesting stuff.
so we were inside this, obviously inside this hill. We started right around the corner and we went all the way through and came out the other end. And over on that very far hill, you see 2 holes in the hill? At the very top of the hill? Concrete holes.
Oh yes, yeah.
So that was the 3rd battery. They got all the way, they built the battery, and then they brought the gun barrels up, and then somebody said, what are you doing? It's 1944, nobody's coming, it's a waste of money. So they just they didn't put it together. But you can still go there, of course, and walk through the tunnels, and that was like the Hilton Hotel. This was what would be a cheap hotel?
Motel 6.
Motel. This is a Motel 6. That's the Hilton, because they spent so much more money. Everything was bigger and pretty and big, and all this is crazy making. And happily, we didn't have to put it together and actually fire some guns.
What's the big square concrete thing?
It was and is a reservoir.
Oh.
Just for water.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, behind that hill, by the way, extra trivia here, behind the hill was a place where they stored extra ammunition and extra gunpowder bags, just in case.
I imagine this would have been real lonely up here.
I'm sure it was not anything fun.
Yeah.
But the but would be, well, let's see, I got to be a choice of being here or in the jungles of Okinawa or someplace and getting shot at every day. Maybe I'll stay here.
Yeah.
Why was it here? Give it a name, the Imperial Japanese Navy. Fear was that a Japanese fleet approaching San Francisco could anchor or maneuver off the coast outside the range of our existing guns that had the longest range guns we had until this place was built was about 15 miles. Battleships in the 1930s, they were approaching ranges of 20, 21, 22 miles. The famous, the Bismarck, probably one of the most famous battleships ever, had a range of about 22 miles. These guns mounted here at an elevation of 400 feet. Remember, the Bismarck's at water level. We're 400 feet in the sky, range of 25 miles. So from here to the Farallon Islands and south to Half Moon Bay.
Wow.
When the First World War rolled around, one of the first things that became obvious was it was not going to be any war like they'd ever had before. Trench warfare started, gas, just horrific conditions, and to complicate things, aircraft. Virtually all of the fortifications that you see, like at Fort Miley, and the other side of the lagoon, what's called Fort Barry over there, they all have one thing in common. With one exception, they're open to the sky because they were designed before airplanes. Wilbur and Orville Wright, 1903, most of the designs for the fortifications that defended San Francisco Bay, and for that matter, seaports around the United States, were based on 1890s, early 1900s designs that didn't take into consideration air cover. The fear was being spotted from the ocean. So everything was built behind earthworks, camouflaged. Many of the guns were designed so that they rose out of the earth and concrete revetments, fired, and then disappeared again. During World War I, it was an axiom that any gun that goes into action is exposed, and it will draw fire back. Because a lot of work went into camouflaging the various guns in the open in World War I. Once the aircraft spotted them, you could call in artillery fire. The only way to really protect them was to, how you doing? Okay, put them underground. There was resistance to this type of design where the gun was actually going to be mounted underground. The old school thought was you had to mount the big gun so it could turn in full circle. They never knew where the enemy's coming from. It was pointed out for these big coastal defense guns, well, the enemy's only going to come from the ocean. In San Francisco, you don't worry about them coming from Oakland. You can design these things. Got 180 arc of fire. You can fire south, you can fire north, you can fire 25 miles out to sea. This was the design they decided on. This was the first one battery of this design that they built, and it was finished first. It became the prototype, and it was manned throughout World War II, and it was scrapped in 1948 without ever firing a shot in anger, as they say. Yeah. But I have a couple of historic photos I'll bring along with me. Yeah. So that's when the big gun was first mounted. They hadn't landscaped it yet. This whole area up here, this was a dairy ranch. They built from scratch. They contractors, they took the top of the hill apart. They constructed the 600-foot long underground structure. Then they covered it back up, and then they landscaped it for camouflage. Yeah, immense construction job. If you've ever been around a construction site, these are 36-inch I-beams. This is what you build skyscrapers out of, and it's almost a solid roof of steel, and then that was encapsulated into 16 feet of solid concrete. As bomb-proof as you could make it. Remember what I was saying, though? Yeah. Thinking was 90-year ago thinking. Airplanes 90 years ago were little biplanes like out of King Kong. And this was proof against any bomb that could be carried by that type of aircraft.
Would a 2,000-pound bomb penetrate these?
Good chance.
Yeah, really?
Yeah. When the battery was finished in the summer of 1940, they brought the big guns in, and they came by railroad car cross country, and they were brought up here by trucks. What it took? It took 3 diesel trucks pulling, 2 pushing to get over the Waldo grade.
I can imagine.
And then they reversed. So there were 3 on the downhill side to keep it from going out of control as it went down the Waldo. Came through the one-way tunnel, and then they brought them up. And the guns were mounted using rollers and block and tackle. Big E Drayage, who are still in business, they did it. They did the construction. And the first time the guns were actually fired was in the summer of 1940. It took 50 guys on each gun, so there were 100 men, yes, living inside these tunnels. And during World War II, you could only be up here for so long. So what they did is they had 2 crews of about 100 guys each, and 100 would be up here, and 100 would be living down in the barracks by the beach, and then they'd swap. You know, there wasn't enough time for them to have marched up here if a Japanese battleship appeared. They lived inside because they had to be able to fire on 5 minutes of an enemy showing up.
Gotta love this view from up here. Well, now you know what I know about Battery Townsley. Pretty interesting stories the docents had for us today on this beautiful sunny day. So thanks for coming along with me today. I'll see you on my next video. Peace.